I'm 28 years old, and I've spent the last 3 years rebuilding my life after discovering a truth so devastating about my family that it shattered everything I thought I knew about love, fairness, and the people who were supposed to protect me. Today, I'm sharing this story not just to heal, but because I know there are others out there who felt the sting of being the unfavored child, the one who's always had to prove their worth while watching a sibling receive unconditional support and grace. My name is Sarah, and for 5 years I paid my parents $800 a month to live in the basement of their suburban home, while my older sister Emma lived upstairs completely rent-free. I justified it in my mind because Emma was supposedly struggling, supposedly needed help getting back on her feet after her divorce. I told myself that my parents were just being compassionate, that they were helping her through a tough time, and that my contribution was helping keep the family home stable. I was wrong about everything. The story I'm about to tell you involves financial manipulation, systematic favoritism, and a family secret so profound that when I finally uncovered it, everything made sense in the most heartbreaking way possible. If you've ever felt like the family scapegoat, the one who's always expected to be grateful for crumbs while watching others feast, this story might feel familiar. And if you've ever wondered whether your feelings of being unfairly treated were valid, I want you to know that sometimes they absolutely are. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding the foundation of my family's dysfunction is crucial to understanding how they were able to manipulate me for so long. I grew up in what appeared to be a typical middle-class family in Ohio. My father worked as a regional manager for a manufacturing company, and my mother was a part-time administrative assistant at a local church. Emma, 3 years older than me, was always the golden child. She was outgoing, socially confident, and had a way of charming everyone around her. I was quieter, more studious, and what my family liked to call overly sensitive. The favoritism wasn't subtle. When Emma wanted to take dance classes, art lessons, or participate in expensive school trips, money was always available. When I expressed interest in similar activities, I was told we needed to be more careful with finances. When Emma got her first car at 16, it was a celebration. When I turned 16, I was told I could start saving for my own car. When Emma struggled in school, tutors were hired immediately. When I struggled, I was told I needed to try harder. I internalized these messages deeply. I believed that Emma deserved more because she was more valuable, more likable, more worthy of investment. I worked part-time jobs throughout high school to pay for my own expenses, and I was proud of my independence. I thought it was building character. I thought my parents were teaching me valuable lessons about self-reliance. After high school, I received a partial scholarship to a state university, but I still needed help with living expenses. My parents told me they couldn't afford to support me, so I worked 2 jobs while maintaining a full course load. Meanwhile, Emma attended a more expensive private college, and my parents covered her tuition, housing, and spending money completely. When I questioned this disparity, my mother explained that Emma needed more support because she wasn't as naturally disciplined as I was. She said they were proud of my independence and didn't want to enable dependency in me like they might in Emma. I graduated with a degree in accounting and immediately found work at a regional firm. I was 22, living in a small apartment and slowly paying off my student loans. Emma graduated a year later with a communications degree and moved back home while she figured out her next steps. She lived with our parents for 2 years rent-free before meeting and marrying Jake, a successful real estate agent. For 3 years, Emma and Jake lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs. I visited regularly and everything seemed perfect. Emma had become a social media influencer with a modest following, documenting her picture-perfect life. She posted about date nights, home renovations, and luxury purchases. I was genuinely happy for her, even as I continued living paycheck to paycheck in my studio apartment. Then Emma's world fell apart. Jake was arrested for embezzlement. The house was seized, the assets were frozen, and Emma was left with nothing but debt and a very public scandal. She moved back to our parents' house, and I rallied around her with the rest of the family. I brought her groceries, helped her navigate the legal complexities, and offered emotional support during what was clearly the worst period of her life. 6 months later, when Emma seemed to be getting back on her feet, I faced my own crisis. The accounting firm where I worked was bought out by a larger company, and my position was eliminated. I had some savings, but not enough to cover both my apartment rent and the job search period I anticipated. I was devastated and embarrassed to need help. When I approached my parents about temporarily moving back home, they were surprisingly welcoming. They said they'd love to have me there, that it would be good for Emma to have my support during her difficult time, and that we could work out a fair arrangement. That fair arrangement, they explained, would be $800 a month for the basement room, plus contributing to household expenses and helping with chores. I was confused by the rent requirement since Emma wasn't paying anything, but my parents explained that Emma was dealing with legal issues and trauma while I was simply between jobs. They said it wouldn't be fair to expect someone in Emma's situation to pay rent, but that I was capable of contributing. They framed it as helping me maintain my independence and self-respect. I agreed because I needed the housing, and $800 was less than my apartment rent. I moved into the basement, which my parents had converted into a basic bedroom and living area. It was comfortable enough, but it was clearly a basement. Emma had her old childhood bedroom upstairs, beautifully decorated and spacious. The first few months were manageable. I found a new job within 6 weeks, and having stable housing during the transition was genuinely helpful. Emma and I got along well, and I felt like I was contributing to the family's stability. I cooked dinner several times a week, helped with household maintenance, and provided emotional support to Emma as she navigated her divorce proceedings. But as the months turned into years, I began to notice things that bothered me. Emma wasn't actively job searching. She was spending her days working on her social media content and occasionally doing sponsored posts, but she wasn't earning substantial income. When I asked about her job search, she said she was focusing on healing and rebuilding her brand. My parents supported this completely, often praising her resilience and creativity. Meanwhile, I was expected to maintain my rent payments without fail. When I was sick with the flu and missed 3 days of work, my parents reminded me that bills don't stop for illness. When I asked if I could pay rent a few days late because of a car repair, they expressed disappointment in my financial planning. The double standard was becoming impossible to ignore. I also noticed that Emma was making purchases that seemed inconsistent with someone who was financially struggling. She bought new clothes regularly, got her hair done professionally every 6 weeks, and frequently went out to expensive restaurants with friends. When I mentioned that these expenses seemed significant for someone not working, my parents explained that Emma needed these small luxuries to maintain her mental health and social connections. 2 years passed. Emma's divorce was finalized, and she received a modest settlement. She used part of it to buy a new car, and she began talking about eventually moving out, but there was no timeline. I was still paying $800 a month, and I was starting to feel trapped. I wanted to move out, but I was struggling to save money for a security deposit and first month's rent while maintaining my current expenses. The breaking point came during the 3rd year of this arrangement. I had been working overtime to save money for my own place, and I was finally close to having enough for a move. I was exhausted from working 10-hour days and maintaining household contributions, and I was feeling increasingly resentful about the disparity in expectations. One evening, I overheard Emma on the phone with a friend, talking about her plans to travel to Europe for a month. She was discussing accommodations, restaurant reservations, and shopping plans. The trip sounded expensive, and I was stunned that someone supposedly struggling financially was planning such an elaborate vacation. When I asked Emma about the trip, she said she needed it for her mental health and that she'd been saving money from her sponsored posts. When I asked how she'd been saving money while not paying rent, she looked confused and said that wasn't her responsibility. When I pushed further, asking how it was fair that I paid rent while she traveled to Europe, she became defensive and said our situations were different. I decided to have a conversation with my parents about the growing disparity. I had been living in their home for 3 years, paying nearly $30,000 in rent, while Emma had paid nothing. I explained that I felt the arrangement had become unfair and that I needed to understand the reasoning behind the different expectations. My parents' response was dismissive and frustrating. They said that Emma was still healing from trauma and that comparing our situations was inappropriate. They explained that I was benefiting from below-market rent and that I should be grateful for their help. They said that Emma's recovery was more important than what I perceived as fairness. I left that conversation feeling gaslit and confused. I began to question whether I was being unreasonable, whether my feelings of unfairness were valid, whether I was being selfish for wanting equal treatment. I started researching family dynamics and favoritism, trying to understand whether my perceptions were accurate. What I discovered was both validating and heartbreaking. I was living in a family system where I was the designated responsible child, expected to be self-sufficient and grateful, while Emma was the designated vulnerable child, deserving of protection and support. These roles weren't based on actual need or capability, but on established family dynamics that had been reinforced for decades. I began documenting the financial disparity carefully. Over 3 years, I had paid $24,000 in rent, plus thousands more in household expenses, groceries, and utilities. Emma had contributed nothing financially while living rent-free, receiving emotional support, and being excused from household responsibilities. But the documentation revealed something even more disturbing. I started tracking Emma's spending based on her social media posts and casual conversations. Her shopping trips, restaurant visits, beauty appointments, and travel plans suggested she was spending significantly more money than I was, despite claiming financial hardship. I became suspicious about the source of Emma's income. Her sponsored posts were infrequent and typically paid modest amounts. Her divorce settlement had been limited, yet she was living a lifestyle that suggested substantial disposable income. The truth came to light in the most unexpected way. I was helping my parents organize their financial documents for tax preparation when I discovered bank statements that changed everything. There were monthly transfers from my parents' account to Emma's account in the amount of $1,000. The transfers had been happening for the entire 3 years I'd been paying rent. I sat in my parents' office, holding bank statements that proved my parents had been giving Emma $1,000 a month while charging me $800 a month. They weren't just letting her live rent-free, they were actively subsidizing her lifestyle with my rent payments, plus an additional $200 from their own savings. The math was staggering. Over 3 years, Emma had received $36,000 in direct payments from our parents, plus free housing, utilities, and food. I had paid $24,000 in rent and contributed thousands more in household expenses. The total financial disparity was over $60,000. I confronted my parents with the bank statements that evening. I asked them to explain the monthly transfers to Emma while I was paying rent. My parents were clearly shocked that I had discovered their arrangement, but their response was even more shocking than their deception. My mother explained that Emma needed the money to maintain her dignity and social connections during her recovery. My father said that Emma had been through enough trauma and deserved support. They said the money was helping Emma rebuild her life and that it was temporary. When I asked why they hadn't told me about the payments, my mother said it was none of my business and that Emma had requested privacy about her finances. When I asked why I was paying rent while Emma was receiving money, my father said my situations were different and that I was capable of supporting myself. I asked them directly whether they understood that my rent payments were essentially funding Emma's allowance. My mother became defensive and said that wasn't how they saw it. My father said that both arrangements were helping their daughters and that I was being selfish by making comparisons. The conversation escalated when I asked whether they thought this arrangement was fair. My mother said that fairness wasn't about equal treatment, but about giving each child what they needed. My father said that I had always been more capable and that Emma needed more support. I asked them whether they loved Emma more than me. My mother said that was a terrible thing to ask and that they loved us differently. My father said that Emma was more vulnerable and that I was stronger. The final devastating blow came when I asked whether they would have helped me if I had been in Emma's situation. My parents looked at each other uncomfortably before my mother said that I would have handled it differently and wouldn't have needed the same level of support. I realized in that moment that my parents genuinely believed Emma deserved more support, more money, more compassion, and more consideration than I did. They believed this not because of circumstances, but because of fundamental differences in how they valued their daughters. I told my parents that I needed time to process this information and that I would be moving out as soon as possible. My mother said that I was overreacting and that I should be grateful for the help they'd given me. My father said that I was being dramatic and that every family had different arrangements. I spent the next 2 weeks apartment hunting with a newfound urgency. I found a small but comfortable place within my budget, and I arranged to move out within the month. I didn't tell Emma about the bank statements initially, but I did tell her that I was moving out and that I felt the family dynamics had become unhealthy for me. Emma's response was telling. She said she was sorry I felt that way, but that she didn't understand why I was making such a big deal about rent. She said that I had chosen to live there and that no one had forced me to pay anything. She said that she was grateful for our parents' help and that I should be too. I realized that Emma either didn't know about the monthly transfers or didn't care about the disparity. Either way, her lack of empathy for my situation was clear. I moved out on a Saturday in March, and I felt simultaneously liberated and heartbroken. I was free from the daily reminders of favoritism, but I was also leaving behind the family I had always tried so hard to please. The first few months in my new apartment were emotionally difficult. I was processing not just the financial manipulation, but years of subtle and overt favoritism. I was grieving the family I thought I had and learning to accept the family I actually had. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in family systems and emotional abuse. She helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of financial abuse combined with systematic favoritism. She explained that families often designate one child as the responsible caretaker and another as the vulnerable one who needs protection, and that these roles aren't based on actual capabilities or needs. Through therapy, I began to understand that my parents' treatment of Emma and me wasn't about love or support, but about control and established patterns. They had created a system where Emma was rewarded for dependency and I was punished for independence. They had used financial manipulation to maintain this system and to keep both Emma and me tied to their household. I also began to understand that my feelings of unfairness were completely valid. I hadn't been overly sensitive or selfish. I had been responding normally to abnormal treatment. 6 months after I moved out, I decided to confront Emma directly about the monthly payments. I met her for coffee and showed her copies of the bank statements. I explained that our parents had been giving her $1,000 a month while charging me $800 a month, and that this arrangement had created a $60,000 disparity over 3 years. Emma's reaction was a mixture of surprise and defensiveness. She said she hadn't realized I was paying rent, which was clearly untrue given our previous conversations. She said that the money from our parents was helping her rebuild her life, and that she deserved support after what she'd been through. When I asked her whether she thought the arrangement was fair, she said that fairness wasn't about equal treatment, but about equal outcomes. She said that I had always been more successful and that she needed more help to reach the same level. I asked her whether she thought I deserved the same support she had received. She said that I had never needed it and that I was stronger than she was. She said that I should be proud of my independence and that I should be grateful our parents had helped me by providing housing. The conversation ended with Emma saying that she didn't understand why I was making such a big deal about money and that families should support each other without keeping score. She said that she was disappointed in me for being so focused on fairness instead of being happy for her recovery. I left that coffee meeting understanding that Emma was either unwilling or unable to acknowledge the disparity in our treatment. She had internalized the family narrative that she deserved more support and that I deserved less, and she wasn't interested in examining whether that narrative was fair or accurate. I decided to limit my contact with Emma and my parents while I continued working through my feelings in therapy. I wasn't ready to cut them off completely, but I needed space to heal and to establish boundaries. During this period of limited contact, something unexpected happened. I received a promotion at work that came with a substantial salary increase and additional responsibilities. I was recognized for my analytical skills, my attention to detail, and my ability to solve complex problems. My supervisor told me that I was being considered for a leadership development program that could lead to partnership track positions. Around the same time, I started a side business providing bookkeeping services to small businesses. My accounting background and organizational skills made me naturally suited for this work, and I quickly built a client base. The additional income allowed me to save money for the first time in years. I also began investing in myself in ways I had never been able to before. I took professional development courses, joined networking groups, and started building relationships with other professionals in my field. I was discovering parts of myself that had been suppressed by years of family dysfunction. The contrast between my growing success and my family's perception of me became even more stark. I was thriving professionally and personally, while Emma was still living with our parents and receiving financial support. Yet my family continued to treat Emma as the success story and me as the one who needed to be grateful for their help. The final confrontation came during my parents' 40th wedding anniversary celebration. Emma had planned a surprise party at a local restaurant, and I was invited to attend. I debated whether to go, but I decided that I wanted to see my extended family and that I was strong enough to handle whatever dynamics might arise. The party was beautiful, and Emma had clearly put significant effort into organizing it. She gave a touching speech about our parents' love and support, and she thanked them for always being there for their daughters. She talked about how grateful she was for their help during her difficult time, and how proud she was to be their daughter. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my remarks brief and positive. I thanked my parents for their love and support, and I wished them well in their retirement years. I didn't mention the financial disparity or the years of favoritism, but I also didn't pretend that our relationships were perfect. After the formal celebration, I was talking with my aunt and uncle when my mother approached me. She said that she was proud of how well I was doing and that she was glad I had found success. She said that she had always known I was capable of taking care of myself and that she was happy to see me thriving. I thanked her for the compliment, but I also said that I wished she had shown the same confidence in Emma's capabilities. I said that I believed Emma would have been just as successful if she had been expected to be independent and self-sufficient. My mother's response was immediate and defensive. She said that Emma was different from me and that she had needed more support. She said that I had always been stronger and that Emma had been more vulnerable. She said that good parents give their children what they need, not what they want. I told my mother that I understood her perspective, but that I disagreed with her assessment. I said that Emma had been just as capable as I was, but that she had been enabled to be dependent while I had been forced to be independent. I said that this difference in treatment hadn't been based on our actual needs or capabilities, but on established patterns that had been reinforced over years. My mother became visibly upset and said that I was being unfair and ungrateful. She said that she and my father had always done their best for both of their daughters and that I was rewriting history to make myself a victim. I told my mother that I wasn't trying to make anyone a villain, but that I needed her to understand that her best intentions had created real harm. I said that I had spent years believing I was less valuable than Emma, and that this belief had affected my self-esteem and my relationships. The conversation was interrupted when Emma joined us. She asked what we were talking about, and my mother explained that I was upset about the financial arrangements from when I lived at home. Emma said that she thought we had moved past that, and that she was disappointed I was still focused on money. I told Emma that it wasn't about money, but about the message that the financial disparity had sent about our relative worth. I said that I had spent years believing I was less deserving of support and love, and that this belief had been reinforced by our parents' actions. Emma said that she didn't understand why I was making such a big deal about something that had helped her during a difficult time. She said that she had been grateful for our parents' support, and that I should be happy for her instead of making comparisons. I asked Emma whether she thought it was fair that I had paid rent while she received money. She said that our situations had been different and that comparisons weren't helpful. She said that she had been recovering from trauma and that I had been building my career. I asked Emma whether she thought I deserved the same support she had received. She said that I had never needed it and that I was stronger than she was. She said that I should be proud of my independence and that I should be grateful our parents had helped me become self-sufficient. My father joined the conversation at this point, and he said that he was disappointed that I was bringing up old grievances at a celebration. He said that I was being selfish and that I was ruining the evening for everyone. I realized that nothing I said would change their perspectives. They had created a narrative where Emma was the vulnerable child who deserved support, and I was the strong child who should be grateful for the opportunity to be independent. They weren't interested in examining whether this narrative was fair or accurate. I told my family that I loved them, but that I needed to establish boundaries about what I would and wouldn't accept in our relationships. I said that I would no longer participate in conversations where my feelings were dismissed or where I was expected to be grateful for unequal treatment. I said that I wanted to have relationships with all of them, but that those relationships would need to be based on mutual respect and acknowledgement of past harm. I said that I wasn't asking them to change their relationship with Emma, but that I needed them to understand that their treatment of me had been unfair and had caused real pain. My mother said that she didn't understand why I was making such demands and that I was being unreasonable. My father said that I was being dramatic and that I should just be grateful for the support they had given me. Emma said that she was disappointed in me for making the evening about my complaints. I left the party early, and I felt both sad and relieved. I was sad that my family couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge the harm they had caused, but I was relieved that I had finally spoken my truth and established clear boundaries. Over the following months, I maintained limited contact with my family. I responded to texts and calls, but I didn't initiate contact, and I didn't participate in family gatherings. I was working on healing and building a life that wasn't defined by my family's dysfunction. During this period, my professional success continued to grow. I was accepted into the leadership development program at my firm, and my side business was generating substantial additional income. I was able to save money, travel, and invest in experiences that brought me joy. I also began building deeper friendships with people who appreciated my strengths and didn't take advantage of my generosity. I was learning to recognize healthy relationships and to avoid people who expected me to be grateful for crumbs. A year after the anniversary party, I received an unexpected phone call from my father. He said that he and my mother had been talking about our relationship and that they wanted to understand my perspective better. He said that they were willing to go to family therapy to work through our issues. I was surprised by this offer, but I was also cautious. I told my father that I appreciated his willingness to try, but that I needed to see evidence of genuine change before I would be willing to invest in rebuilding our relationship. I suggested that we start with individual therapy for each of them, followed by family therapy if they were willing to do the work. I said that I needed them to understand that their treatment of Emma and me had been unfair and that this unfairness had caused real harm. My father agreed to consider this approach, and we ended the call with a tentative plan to explore family therapy in the future. I was cautiously optimistic, but I was also realistic about the challenges of changing decades of established patterns. 6 months later, Emma called me to say that she was finally ready to move out of our parents' house. She had been accepted to a graduate program in social work, and she was excited about starting a new chapter in her life. She said that she was grateful for our parents' support and that she was ready to be more independent. I was genuinely happy for Emma's decision to pursue graduate school, and I told her that I was proud of her for taking this step. I also told her that I hoped she would be successful in her program and that I looked forward to seeing her develop her own independence. Emma asked whether I would be willing to help her move and to provide emotional support during her transition. I told her that I would be happy to help, but that I needed her to acknowledge that our treatment by our parents had been unfair and that this unfairness had affected our relationship. Emma said that she understood that I felt hurt and that she was sorry for any pain I had experienced. She said that she was willing to work on our relationship and that she wanted to understand my perspective better. I told Emma that I appreciated her willingness to listen, but that I needed to see evidence of genuine change before I would be willing to invest in rebuilding our relationship. I said that I wasn't asking her to change her relationship with our parents, but that I needed her to understand that their treatment of me had been unfair. Emma said that she was willing to try, and we agreed to start with small steps. We began having coffee meetings every few weeks, and Emma made an effort to listen to my perspective without becoming defensive. She also began to acknowledge that our parents' treatment of us had been different, even if she didn't fully understand why that was problematic. Meanwhile, my parents began individual therapy, and they started to understand how their favoritism had affected both Emma and me. They began to acknowledge that their treatment of us had been unfair, and that they had created a system where Emma was rewarded for dependency and I was punished for independence. The healing process was slow and difficult, but it was also genuinely meaningful. My parents began to understand that their good intentions had created real harm, and they started to make changes in how they interacted with both Emma and me. They stopped making financial decisions that favored Emma, and they started to treat us more equally in their expectations and support. They also began to acknowledge my achievements and to express pride in my independence, rather than taking it for granted. Most importantly, they began to understand that love isn't about giving each child what you think they need, but about treating each child with equal respect and consideration. They began to see that their favoritism had been based on their own biases and assumptions, not on Emma's and my actual capabilities or needs. Today, 3 years after I moved out of my parents' house, I have a successful career, a thriving business, and healthy relationships with people who appreciate my strengths. I've learned to recognize my own worth and to demand treatment that reflects that worth. My relationship with my family has improved, but it's still a work in progress. My parents are genuinely trying to change their patterns, and Emma is learning to be more independent. We have regular family therapy sessions, and we're slowly rebuilding trust and respect. I've also learned to set boundaries that protect my emotional well-being. I don't participate in conversations where my feelings are dismissed, and I don't accept treatment that makes me feel less valued than Emma. I've learned that healthy relationships require mutual respect, and that love isn't about sacrifice or gratitude, but about genuine care and consideration. The most important lesson I've learned is that my worth isn't determined by my family's treatment of me. I am valuable and deserving of love and respect, regardless of whether my family recognizes that value. I've learned to validate my own experiences and to trust my own perceptions, even when others try to convince me that I'm being too sensitive or unrealistic. If you're watching this video and you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to know that your feelings are valid. If you've been the responsible child who's expected to be grateful for less, if you've been the one who's always had to prove your worth while watching a sibling receive unconditional support, if you've been told that your desire for fairness is selfish or unrealistic, I want you to know that you're not alone. You deserve to be treated with the same love and respect that your siblings receive. You deserve to have your achievements celebrated and your struggles acknowledged. You deserve to have your voice heard and your feelings validated. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not for what you can provide or how little you need. Setting boundaries with family members is difficult, but it's necessary for your emotional health and well-being. You can love your family and still demand fair treatment. You can be grateful for the support you've received and still acknowledge that you deserved more. You can work toward healing and reconciliation while still protecting yourself from further harm. Remember that healing is a process, not a destination. There will be setbacks and disappointments, but there will also be moments of genuine connection and growth. The most important thing is that you refuse to accept treatment that makes you feel less valuable than you are. I'm sharing this story because I want other people who've experienced family favoritism to know that they're not crazy, they're not selfish, and they're not overreacting. Your experiences are valid, your feelings are legitimate, and your desire for fairness is reasonable. I also want to say that while my story has a relatively positive ending, not all family relationships can be healed. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to maintain distance from family members who refuse to acknowledge their harmful behavior. Sometimes love means protecting yourself from people who hurt you, even if those people are family. Whatever your situation, remember that you have value that exists independently of your family's recognition. You have strengths and capabilities that deserve to be acknowledged and celebrated. You have a right to be treated with respect and consideration, and you have the power to create a life that reflects your worth. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've had similar experiences with family favoritism or financial manipulation, please share your story in the comments. I read every comment, and I want you to know that your voice matters and your experiences are valid. If this video resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing. Creating content like this helps me continue healing and hopefully helps others who are going through similar experiences. Remember that you're not alone, you're not crazy, and you deserve so much more than crumbs.